This is Beyond the Resume, the podcast that brings you the stories, advice, and insights behind some of the most successful people in real estate. Beyond the Resume is brought to you by Jackson Lucas Executive Search, the industry leader in human capital solutions. Here is Chris Papa and Lisa Flicker.
AJ Jackson, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Wonderful to see you
You are
today.
the president of Leo Impact Capital, based out of the DC metro area. Can you tell the world about Leo?
Sure. So we're investors, and what we're really focused on is financial mobility for everyday working renters. And so we try to achieve that through investments in real estate in great neighborhoods, and then operating strategies that build social connection at those properties. We think that's a way to both drive long-term financial performance for our investors, but also to drive greater financial opportunity for the people who live in those communities.
And what does that look like? Like you're buying
Yeah. So from a real estate perspective,
multifamily?
yeah, from a real estate perspective, we're looking at existing naturally occurring affordable housing essentially, but it's got to be in a really great location, a place where we can lock in not just affordability for the long term to serve what we call the missing middle renter, and that's typically a person who's over income for federally supported housing. They're not in a tax credit unit, they're not eligible for a HUD voucher, but they're financially pressed in a growing market where most of the jobs are, right? And so they can't afford rent along with the basic necessities in a place where you'd actually want to live, that has access to grocery stores and transportation, schools, job access, parks, healthcare access, et cetera. So it's buying those kind of assets, locking in affordability. Everything we do is mixed income. So when I say locking in affordability, we do set aside from a rent and income perspective a portion of the units to every property, but we keep a portion that's market rate as well. And then again, we operate those properties to try to build social connection there, because we know that location plus social connection are actually the two predictors, two drivers of economic mobility for people. And so our view is if we can do that, then that's really a way to help those residents to move up socially, economically, to stabilize those communities. And it provides durable operating performance at the properties and contributes to long-term capital appreciation of the properties, because our capital is non-concessionary, right? We're not doing charity. We hope we're doing good, but we're not doing charity. We are trying to drive competitive market rate returns. We'll insert concessionary capital into a project if it's a way to accelerate the impact or deepen or lengthen the impact at a property. But fundamentally, we invest through funds, and those funds are trying to drive competitive market returns. So that's what it looks like. We can talk about some of the deals we've done and sort of a little bit more detail around how we execute those strategies. But that's really what it's about: is how do we help people to move forward who are going to be just everyday working renters by necessity.
Like the teachers, the cops,
The teachers, the cops, the first responders, the EMTs, the service technicians who keep our office buildings going and keep our retail spaces going. The HR and payroll clerks, the IT guys who keep things like this podcast going, all those folks who are caught in that missing middle from an income perspective. If you think about it in dollars, our sort of target renter, if you will, is somebody who's making probably plus or minus $60,000 a year, up to plus or minus $100,000 a year. And that'll vary by market, but that's generally somebody, again, who's going to be over income for any sort of public support, but they're going to be pressed to afford the market rent plus any student loan debt or car payments or healthcare cost or whatever it may be, in markets where the average rent is well over $2,000. So that's and home ownership is out of reach. That you're for folks in that income band in the kind of markets that are growing, which is really where a lot of the jobs are. So they're in this catch 20.
And I feel like that messy middle is a really fascinating space to me, because I think oftentimes that, it's hard for people to pull themselves from, out of needing all of these services. I know I grew up in affordable housing, and I grew up with parents who would say this to me, which is like, yes, if we get that next job, then we lose all of this and we're actually not making any more money.
Exactly. No, that's one of the things that motivated us to start this whole work and focus in this area from the beginning was exactly that. Right, that there is you can call it a benefits cliff is how some people describe it. But there is this real tension where you move forward sort of financially from a private sector, from a job perspective, you move backwards from a household economics perspective. We don't have that housing cliff because we're not taking federal money, because we're doing things with private capital. We have a lot more flexibility. And because all of our properties are mixed income by design, there's always an ability to stay in the property as income rises. And we think that's really important because that ecosystem of people who are actually making progress, doing better, have different connections, different resources, it's that ecosystem plus the neighborhood is what drives outcomes for people over time, what helps people to actually get their lives better, move to a different trajectory over time. That's not our theory, that's the social science research, that's just the facts. And so that to us has really become a critical focus, and I think it's an underinvested space, frankly, both from a social perspective as well as from a financial opportunity perspective.
And you mentioned some deals you could maybe talk about. Like, yeah, can you talk about one and how it kind of works?
Yeah, so I'll always talk about the newest one first, right? Because it's very exciting.
Yeah,
But we
your new baby.
we have a new fund, and we just acquired a deal at the end of last year in Charlotte, North Carolina. And that's a deal in a great neighborhood. For folks who know Charlotte, I always say this, and everyone knows exactly where it is, even though I'm not a golfer. It's not far from the Quail Hollow Golf Club. So great neighborhood, great part of Charlotte, access to the light rail, access to groceries, retail, healthcare, amenities, jobs, all of that, great commute to employment. In that property, we're setting aside 20% of the units in partnership with a local nonprofit called the Lotus Campaign, who houses working people who are at risk of homelessness or formerly homeless. And so those units are set aside at rents that are essentially at 60% of AMI or less. And so that's around $1,000. Depends on the unit size. And then we have additional units that are set aside for sort of middle income renters up to 80% of AMI, and then completely unrestricted as well. And so the notion is bringing Lotus into this property, bringing the network of support for residents that they can provide for folks who are in that at risk of homelessness or formerly homeless category, combined with access to a great neighborhood and access to a resident base that is diverse socioeconomically, is a way to drive economic opportunity for those folks over the long term. In addition, we're doing some of the things that we do at every property, such as we partner with the folks at Isusu to report the on-time rent payments to help residents build credit. And across our portfolio, we've actually moved over 200 residents from subprime to prime credit through that rent reporting while they've been in our units. And that's huge because that's not just about, people talk about in terms of buying a house. It's it's not really that's a great long-term goal. It's not really about that. It's about a cheaper cell phone. It's about a cheaper car loan. We don't want you to leave, but it's about being able to get into a better apartment if you do leave, because we know landlords use credit when they're screening tenants. It's about job applications. Employers use credit as a proxy for all sorts of things. And so it's really about, again, moving to a different life trajectory, giving people real opportunities for economic mobility through the things that we do at the property level to build community and
Yeah,
to
getting a
empower growth.
credit. I was with a friend yesterday. He was talking about some things that his life turned around, and he's like, "And then I got a credit score, and like I got my first credit score." I was like, "I remember
It's
that too."
it is a big deal. It is a big we have several residents across the portfolio who had no credit score and helped them establish this. It is a big deal. It really opens up opportunity, which is what we're about.
AJ, how did you get into this? I mean, I guess out of college, it looks like you were a chief of staff at GSA, but did that kind of propel you to this? Like, what
The
was
GSA
passion?
propelled me to real estate. I worked on Capitol Hill before then, and I went to the GSA, and that really propelled my interest in real estate. And then I left GSA and went to business school. And after business school, I was a developer. And the sort of the crooked path to this work was, as a developer, I was really interested in public-private partnerships and work that we could do with cities, with housing authorities, with churches, with local governments to create something physically but there was always an and. We're going to create something physically, and we're going to increase housing affordability, or we're going to create some employment opportunities, or we're going to help this organization, endow the retirements of their, retired clergy, whatever it may be. But there was always an and to it. And so that really got me thinking, doing that work, and I did that for almost 15 years, really got me thinking about development and real estate as a platform for broader mobility and broader impact. And one of the folks I went to business school with is Matt Kelly, who's the CEO of JBG Smith. And JBG were based in the Washington D.C. area. They're a large real estate private equity firm, now a public REIT, and they've been really noodling with this question of housing affordability and why is it that we can't build units for the missing middle, that there's no one out there providing solutions to the missing middle. How do we come out with this? And so they had some ideas that they were kicking around. ABG, when they were a private equity fund, were the largest investors in our development deals. And I was talking to Matt at one point. He said, we have this idea. We're trying to kick it around. What do you think about this? And I said, I think there's actually something to this. I think there is a way to build a platform to go out and invest in this type of housing and do the kind of things we want to do. And he said, well, great. Why don't you come over and try to see if we can make it into a business? And so that was really the start of Leo, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of JBG, and the start of raising these funds and doing this work. But it's been this, it's been this cricket path all the way back to GSA, I guess.
And how did you name Leo?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
So JBG Smith's mascot is the lion. And Leo is Latin for lion. And we didn't want to, we thought it was important to create a subsidiary platform that was solely focused on impact investing, just to draw some distinction between the work that we do and the great work that JBG does on the market rate side and development and investment. But we didn't want to lose the association, because there is no Leo without JBG, without the support and infrastructure that they get and capital that they provided to help launch the platform, I don't know, 7-8 years ago, without all without all of those resources. So we wanted to keep that tie. And so that's where Leo came from.
When you do that deal in Charlotte or whatever deal, sometimes are you getting some sort of subsidies from, are you have to go to the nonprofit, right? You need the relationship there. But are you going to the city of Charlotte and saying, hey, we're going to provide you with essential workers with some housing here, and are they kind of getting involved too at all?
So sometimes it's a deal by deal structure. Sometimes we do. So in Charlotte, we're seeking a tax abatement in exchange for long-term affordability restrictions on some units at that property. And so sometimes we'll do things like that. Again, that concessionary capital, when we can drive deeper impact or longer impact, then we'll bring that capital in. But we have other deals where there's none of that, where it's just our fund and typically agency debt that are invested in the asset. So it really kind of varies by deal. The other place that we'll use it is around defensive capital investments and sustainability. So as a part of every investment, we do not just the conventional kind of physical needs assessment, but we do an energy audit. And that gives you we marry that energy audit to the capital plan. And that gives you kind of a roadmap for ways that you can invest in the property that will harden it, extend its useful life, but also reduce energy consumption, water consumption, which reduce operating costs for us, can reduce utility costs for residents. And oftentimes we will then go to either states, localities, or utilities and use grant dollars or other concessionary dollars to fund some of those infrastructure investments. And so that's a way to essentially lower our out-of-pocket costs for CapEx while also extending the useful life of the asset. And again, in a lot of cases, reducing the occupancy costs for residents and the operating costs for us as owners.
And do you do any political work around, fighting for dollars for these middle folks?
We do a lot of work around, we think tax abatement is the most powerful policy tool that governments can use to drive affordability, because you can tie it exactly to what you want. You can verify it annually through the rent roll, and you can turn it off if it's not being met. And it's much cheaper on a dollars per door basis than putting direct dollars into deals. So we do a lot of work at the local level and the state level advocating for policies that make tax abatement programmatic, because the real benefit of tax relief is when the senior lender can underwrite it. It's a pickup to NOI, right? Taxes are usually our second largest expense behind payroll at any property. So it's a big pickup to NOI if you can reduce the taxes. And if you could underwrite that, then it's obviously a huge pickup to leverage. And that's really where the economic value comes. It's much more on the being able to leverage it than on the annual savings. But that's really only possible if it's predictable and programmatic. If it's ad hoc and negotiated, it's hard to underwrite. So we didn't underwrite it in our financing for the deal in Charlotte, for example, because it's not programmatic. So that's where we spend a lot of time on the policy side, and then we do work on some other things, kind of at the federal level, trying to raise awareness around the importance of these naturally occurring affordable housing assets to the overall housing landscape, right? And the importance of having strategies that support preservation, non-LIHTC preservation, as a part of addressing housing affordability. That work is really, I think, almost more defensive, because often these assets aren't thought of as part of the affordable housing solution. The fact is, though, the overwhelming majority of housing that people live in that is quote unquote affordable to them is privately owned and unregulated. It's this NOAA housing, right? And the fact is that it is most likely to be converted to to through value add with higher rents, or to be demolished and redeveloped when it is sold. And so it is at risk, and we lose over 100,000 units of it every year. And so not having that in the sort of affordable housing arsenal and only focusing on development, it's like, filling a bag that has a leak at the bottom. And if you don't cinch the leak, then you're not actually making the progress that you need to be making. And so we spend a lot of time on that, but again, that's more defensive.
We'll stop with the wonkiness here. Let's talk about AJ, young AJ. I see you went to the University of Alabama. Like,
I did.
Are you from Alabama, or did you a big Bear Bryant fan, or?
Well, I'm a big Nick Saban fan, and unfortunately he's moved on to TV. So we're in a little bit of a mourning period. But no, I went to high school in Alabama, and I was planning to go to college on one of the coasts. I thought I'd go to USC or NYU were kind of my two schools I wanted to attend. And then the University of Alabama just kind of persistence pays off, right? They just kind of kept calling and kept calling and kept calling, and ultimately they offered me an opportunity that I couldn't pass up. It was a 4-year full ride. It included housing, and included a stipend. And so I said, well, I'll check this out, and if I don't like it, I can always just transfer. And I really ended up loving it. And it was an incredibly formative experience, because it was a large public university. And so the diversity of people, ideas, thoughts that you're exposed to in that kind of an environment is I think it's important it makes you more well-rounded. And challenges you, I think, in good ways. At least it did for me. And so I thought that was fantastic. But it's also the thing I realized. I'd been in very small schools and private schools when I was younger, and the thing that I realized in a large university is that it's large enough that there is a critical mass for any interest or activity that you have. And so that also made it a really great experience.
Yeah,
Right.
I'm a big
Making the
fan of
big
them.
school small is
Yeah, it's you can certainly be overwhelmed, but you can also make it very small, very intimate, and really rewarding and exciting.
Yeah, I always wanted to go to like a small university. I ended up going to Rutgers, which is about 35,000 people. It was
Yeah.
big, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna get lost in the
yeah.
shuffle. And then
Yeah.
I found like a group and a major type of thing where I was like, oh, this is not, there's a lot of small schools within a big school.
There are Exactly, well said.
So yeah, I mean, obviously if you got a 4-year ride, like you're a good student, I imagine, right?
It's a good
Yeah.
student.
And so, like, growing up, did you have like one of the reasons we work with a lot of universities, and it's a lot of times because like myself and Lisa, like we just didn't know like the different options of what your life could do, and careers. And so, like, what were you thinking when you were going to school or growing up?
I thought I would be an investor of some sort. I thought I'd do something in the either merchant banking or iBanking, or something like that. As was just the idea of sort of buying and growing and building businesses was interesting to me, but the capital side was also interesting to me. And I didn't have a firm idea of what that looked like. But all the time I was in college, and actually even in high school before, I was very involved in politics. And so ultimately I ended up not doing anything on the finance side, and coming to DC, and working on Capitol Hill after I graduated. So um, it was a complete 180. And I will say I was not as focused in my career search as I probably should have been in college. I was doing things that were interesting, and it was a great kind of well-rounded experience. But it wasn't like I wasn't kind of building a track record, of finance internships. I did some, but I also did some travel. I did some things outside of finance, and so um, anyway, it was kind of a happenstance. I ended up in politics.
We have to play this podcast for a lot of students right now because there are a lot of students just freaking out about, getting those summer internships. And it's like, oh, you know what? You're a freshman in college. Can you just like hike outside and enjoy the fresh air? But there's just such a pressure to succeed.
Yeah, I don't think that's at all healthy, honestly. I think you ought to have a diversity of experience. How do you know what you don't like, until you've tried something? And college is the time to do that, and youth is the time to do that, right? The costs are really much, much, much lower than you think they are.
Youth is wasted on the young, as they say. What skill sets have you learned? Like if somebody's like, wow, I want to do what AJ does, like kind of what I mean, obviously you got a good personality, like that's important, right? Like you have to have like a connect with people and stuff. And I don't know if that can be taught, maybe it can, but like what sort of skill sets have you acquired to make you successful in your career?
I think flexibility is one of the biggest, and I learned this really doing development, but the ability to go from the macro to the micro and zoom in and out um, was really, really key. Has been key throughout my career, but was really, really key there. I mean, you're making big strategic decisions, and you're thinking about capitalization of projects in one instance. In the next instance, you're thinking about the placement of mailboxes, on a site. It goes from one extreme to the other. And so that has really been valuable. The idea of spending time to think about a vision and sort of an end state so that you have a reasonably defined idea of what the objective is that you can keep in mind as you do these longer term projects, do things that take more time, but also the flexibility to kind of bob and weave and move as circumstances change. And that's been a really another really valuable skill for me. And I think one of the core things is to figure out that intersection of what you like to do and what you're somewhat good at and stay there. Right. I mean, I'm not saying never learn, never push yourself, never grow, but I think that's really important. But we all know there are things that we're fundamentally not good at or that we're less good at, or even if we're good at them, that we don't enjoy doing. And to go down those roads, is really, I think that's where, the people I know who've done that have been observed. It's been a big mistake. And, we have a group of people here in our um, accounting group who love accounting and they're great accountants. There are other people who do it because they think it's a stable job and they think they can be paid decently, and they're not there, 24 months later, because it's not. It's a miserable way to spend your life.
Right. If you're not, I once broke out. I was building this business, right? Jackson Lucas. And I broke out everything that I did like a workflow of my day. And I was like, all right, very granular. And I went through and I'm like, these are the things I'm good at and I like. And then I like moved all the stuff that I don't like and I'm not good at, like to another side, another column. And I was like, I gotta find some people to do this part of it. I should do more of this other stuff that I'm really good at and I like, and less of this other stuff.
Yeah. I mean,
Right.
I think it's a corollary actually to the thing that like, I'm not a big giver of advice, but one of the things that I've experienced that I think is really been helpful to me is, and this is the corollary to what you were saying, Chris, is you've got to take care of your mental health and you've got to be mindful of your mental health. And I'm not talking about sort of clinical mental health, but I mean really just about mood and energy and attitude. And I think it's easy, as you were saying, Lisa, when you're feeling a lot of pressure, when I got to get this intro, I got to do this to overwork yourself, not rest, not exercise, not recharge, not take down. Those things are so important. And when I've struggled and failed and not done as well, it's when I've been trying to put 200% into something, as opposed to putting a really thoughtful 60 or 70% into it, and then taking the time to decompress, to recharge, to refocus. I just think that approach um, to life is leads to more long-term success, sustainable long-term success, than just like bull in the china shop, drive, drive, drive.
Yeah, and I love exactly what you said, kind of the intersection of passion and talent, because we often work with a lot of kids and it's like, well, don't just blindly follow your passion, right? I mean, it's great, but if you really want to have a career, and there's a famous story that Jeff Bezos tells where he was going to be a physicist, and he got this physics homework, and he could like spends hours, and then he went to his roommate across the hall or something, and the guy was like, did it in 2 seconds. He's like, oh, the answer is X, and he's like, all right, I guess this is not the career for me. So you pivot and you pivot.
Yeah, and
Exactly.
you can my experience is, like, I wanted a job. Like, my first one of my first career goal, like, I'm like, "I need a job where I get paid money." Like, I need to make money. That was, like, my thing, and so I was like, "I'm gonna be a lawyer." And so I worked at a big law firm in Manhattan, and I was like, "This is the worst." Like, I'm so miserable. And I was like, it was miserable enough where I'm like, I need to take a chance to somewhere else. Like, it was not worth any money. And so but I was also like, yeah, there's a risk, but there's also like, I had like a kind of somewhat like, I wasn't going to live on the streets. You know what I mean? Like, I could always move back there. But there's some people where it's like Lisa, like, I know she started as a public accountant. I'm like, I'm sure that was
Which
just
was there
miserable for
couldn't have been
you.
a worse job for me. But
Yeah.
you know what? I knew I was gonna get out of college, I was gonna get a job, and that was the number
Yeah.
one thing.
Yeah. I was very fortunate in the summer of my senior year in high school. I worked at a law firm. A friend of mine's father was a partner there. And that cured me of law school,
Yeah,
which was
I was
very,
a paralegal, man. I did not go to law school. Like, I was took my LSATs. I was applying to law school. I worked at this big law firm just to like make money and yada yada yada. I'm like, whoa!
yeah. Yeah.
I'm like, this is not like whatever, a Law and Order. You know,
No, it is not.
where's Judge Judy? This is what's going on here. Well, yeah. Well, so where do you feel the industry? I mean, Noah is a new terminology, but like what you're doing is pretty. I mean, we have this missing middle, which is true. Like, where do you see this? Do you think it's just becoming a bigger and bigger asset class? This type of
You
housing?
know, it's interesting. I've seen people pull back from NOAA and focus on preservation of a low-income housing tax credit projects that are at the end of their compliance period,
Yeah,
which is also a very important thing. I think the challenge that we have with the NOAA space is kind of an asset class or an investment is because it is not in a government program, a federal program, and it's more broadly defined. I think it can sometimes be hard for investors to get their heads around and understand what they're doing and how is it different. And so I think that's kept that side of the business smaller than either, hey, just a value add investor buying the same kind of assets, but I'm trying to reposition them, or I'm buying regulated tax credit properties at the end of their useful life, and I'm either extending that affordability or I'm redeveloping those. And so I think it's been harder to grow, which is both good and bad. I mean, it's less competition for us, but it's also less impact, and it's also means that we have to work on the capital raising side. What's interesting, though, Priya and others have done this research and shown that that NOAA properties actually outperform both on an absolute and risk adjusted basis, higher absolute returns, lower standard deviations relative to sort of class A or luxury on the multifamily space and value add strategies. And I think it's 'cause a lot of those don't materialize as underwritten over time. And this is really durable cash flow. A lot more of it comes from the return comes from the dividend, comes from the income as opposed to from sort of upside pops. But getting that message out is taking time, and having people understand and really look at the data and say, oh yes, this is an investable asset class. Oh yes, these returns are compelling, both absolute and risk adjusted. And so we should allocate here. It's taken longer than I would have thought it would take for that to blossom.
I know, I think you need better PR, because
We do.
honestly, I'm telling you that I guess I haven't spent a lot of time really thinking about it, but when you think about, the that that middle, I feel like I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it is really, we do need better PR because, if you think about it from a business perspective, it makes all the sense in the world. Supply demand dynamics are fantastic. These renters are, they have incomes, they are employed, they're stable working class renters. They are completely priced out of home ownership, and if you look at the numbers, it's largely unattainable in most of these markets, barring a step function increase in their income. Literally going to law school or something like that. It's not going to happen on the career trajectory in the near term. So you have this inherent demand. You have tremendous levels of rent burden among middle income renters. You have these other financial pressures, whether it's student loans or health or other things. And so this demand for stable, well located, affordable housing in markets where there's great job and population growth is just off the charts. But we got to tell the story better.
Well, AJ, you provide stable housing for people, but you're now on unstable ground because you just sat on the hot seat. Yeah.
So, AJ, tell us book, podcast. What have you been listening to or reading lately that you enjoy?
So, yeah, two podcasts that I absolutely love. One's called The Rest is History, which is a history podcast about all types of history, from sort of ancient to modern, European, American, South American, Asian. It's great. I love it. Two entertaining hosts. So cheeky British accents, great show. So highly recommend The Rest is History. And then there's another podcast I love called Founders. And that's a guy who reads books about great entrepreneurs, some great politicians, some great other leaders all throughout history. And what I love about Founders is not just any one episode, but if you listen to it over time, the through lines that are drawn among the habits, behaviors, ideas of people who've been successful in whether it's sports, business, academics, finance, across all these lines, there are some common behavioral through lines that you can pull out. And so I think that's just a fascinating podcast. And then what I'm truly just trying to just check out, I'm a big hunter, so I love Meat Eater.
Never heard of that one.
What are any interesting themes stick out to you? I'm a big listener of NPR's How I Built This, and it's kind of, I feel like it's the same thing. Like, you listen to these entrepreneurs that start these businesses and you're like, I see what kind of goes through most of these people's.
Yeah, it is a lot about having that vision and holding on to it. It is a little bit about, I don't know if you've ever read books like Good to Great, but the whole kind of hedgehog strategy idea, that is really a common theme. The fact that it takes longer than you would think it would take, and this combination of single-mindedness with flexibility. And I'm not describing that well. You really got to listen to the episodes and kind of hear it. But this notion of being obsessive and single-minded about what you want to do, but then also knowing when to listen to the outside, right? Not understanding that at the beginning, people are going to tell you that's impossible or it's a bad idea, and you can't succeed. And so you've got to have the drive to get through that. But then you've also got to, like Apple with the iPhone, or like Intel switching from memory chips to processors with Android. You've got to understand when to pivot and take what you've built and build more on top of that. So that's really interesting. And the other interesting through line is all these people who never want to sell their business. I do find that there is no exit for most of these really successful entrepreneurs, not building towards an exit, which is just very different than the way, from an institutional finance perspective, a lot of people think about creating organizations and businesses and whatnot. So
we work with a lot of founders like that, where the problem is by the time they get to the point that they should sell their business, their whole identity is their business.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's where we say therapy's free with the search. Session planning and therapy.
The easy trap to fall into.
It is.
AJ, you have 3 teenagers. You said, like, what do you like to do outside of work? What keeps you? You
So,
mentioned
like I said,
about like mental health. What keeps you mentally healthy?
exercise is part of my daily morning routine. My wife and I like to get up early and exercise, and that, I think that is really, for me, it's key to sort of staying, being a tolerable human being, frankly, for the rest of the day. So I'm sure the team at Leo thanks me for the exercise. So exercise, like I said, I do like to hunt, like to be out in nature. So in the season, I'm usually out in the woods doing that. When it's not the season, out with my daughter, just hiking or being in the woods. My wife is from Norway, and so we spend a lot of time in the summer relaxing there, and that's a great decompression. It's as off the grid as you can go and be in a very, very modern place, but kind of sit in the woods and enjoy that. And then I like to cook. That's my other.
I love cooking too. Norwegians got it, man. They got it figured out. Because I think I saw on some show or something they have like a TV station dedicated to just slow train rides. Like you're on a
Yes.
train and like literally you're just watching. It's kind of like watching a log on the TV.
They are very into quality of life and nature, and so it's a great place to be. It's a long winter, I will say. It's a great place to be in the summer. It's a very long winter.
Right.
I think I'm going to put that on my list of places I'd like to visit. Sounds phenomenal.
It's June 15th to July 30th. That's the time to go.
Short window.
Well, June 16th is my 25th wedding anniversary, so maybe I'd
Yeah, it's a summer destination. I mean, I love it at all times of year, but if to get the best out of Norway when it's relatively warm, very sunny, and relatively dry, that's the time to do it.
Love it.
So AJ, obviously you've hired a lot of people. What do you look for when you're hiring? If somebody's young and wants to have a career, are there any particular things that you look for as determinants of success?
People who can write. Writing is, I think, becoming less valued, and we've got a lot of great AI tools that can turn average writing into great writing. But people who can write, because I think it's an indication of being able to organize and convey ideas, and that's just a really important core function. Folks with a little bit of some sort of grit or entrepreneurial drive. Someone who said, we just interviewed someone who wants to get into real estate. He said, well, my school didn't offer any real estate programs, so I've been going down to New York and taking these real estate classes at this other school and doing this thing on the side. Or someone else who said, yeah, I wanted to get into real estate. My school didn't offer any classes, so I did all this online stuff, and then my brother and I bought a fourplex and we're renovating it. So just that kind of real hunger and passion for what they want to do, I think, is really important. And then, critical thinking. Often throw out, and I don't give like a formal modeling test or anything like that, but I'll kind of throw out some concepts around an investment and just have someone walk me through how they're thinking about it. And I think that's important. And it's less about absolute right answer or even about reaching the conclusion that I would have reached, but it's more about understanding that there is a thought process and that what that is and what that logic kind of looks like. I think that's really it. I mean, this is a great business. It is not a rocket science business. It can be taught to almost anyone. So
what we don't do this alone. What mentors have had the most impact upon you?
There are two.
Maybe not official mentors, but maybe you thought of them as mentors,
Yeah, there are two people. One is John Kasich, is a guy I worked for when I was recently out of college. He's the former governor of Ohio and a former congressman and chairman of the budget committee in the House. And he really instilled in me the idea of purpose-driven work. I mean, he used to always say, if you want, members of Congress wear these little pins on their jackets, and he used to always say, if you want to get a pin on your jacket and be in a club, you should join the Rotary. But we're here to actually do stuff. Different word, but that was a really it was really impactful working with him. And then the other is, and he recently passed away, unfortunately, my longtime business partner and the guy who hired me straight out of business school is Bob Youngenthalb, the founder of EYA, who just taught me so many things. I mean, Joe Dipper can't talk about it, but so many things. And I think most impactful from Bob was the notion of the win-win solution always being the best solution, and the desire that's what we should be pushing for, not to take as much as we can, but to bring everybody, our competitors, our colleagues, our counterparties along with us.
That's a nice tribute to Bob. Thank you, AJ. Well, I've started to get to know you over the last couple of years. You're a great guy. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. Hope to see you soon. This is a great story, and I hope what the work you're doing gets. Hopefully, maybe we're the PR firm you're looking for.
That's right. Exactly.
Thank you guys for having me.
A lot of people give us the message. I feel like I'm bought in. I drank the Kool-Aid, man. It works.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to Beyond the Resume, a Jackson Lucas podcast where we take a deep dive into the career journeys of some of the top minds in real estate and equip you with the knowledge to move forward in your path towards the success you've envisioned. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Beyond the Resume. We're grateful for your support. All episodes of Beyond the Resume are brought to you by Jackson Lucas, building inclusive and diverse businesses through talent acquisition. Visit us at jacksonlucas.com.